Okay, we should be live on Facebook.
Hooray! Live on Facebook!
Yeah, so if you are watching us, if you are seeing us live, let us know that you're online. Send us some hearts, write some comments. Let us know that we are not just talking to ourselves. That'd be great. I think we have people logging in now. So I know we had a bunch of people who wanted to join us today. So hopefully they'll be able to find out where this is. Okay, I can see some more people logging in.
Fabulous.
So yeah, if you're online, send us some likes, some love hearts, some comments. There should be something on Facebook that if you click, it should let you comment, and I can see it on the screen. Okay, loads of people joining us now. Hello, hello, hello. Right, hello, Niels, Arthur, Giles, welcome. And welcome, Elatia. Elatia, how are you doing?
Thank you. I'm fantastic. How are you? Thank you so much for inviting me back. This is amazing. It's amazing to see you again.
Well, we should really give a shout out to Alfredo. So Alfredo is someone so we did a webinar, 3 years ago, a long time ago.
Yeah, it feels like 100 years at this point.
You know, and I can see Alfredo's online right now. Hi, Alfredo. And Alfredo posted something recently where he said, years ago, we both did a webinar on finding work that you love to do. And I didn't know this. I don't think you knew this, but apparently it was really helpful to him in getting a job. And he'd moved to Spain. And he was like, will you guys please do a follow-up? And before I had a chance to say anything, you were like, yeah, I'm up for it. And I was like, okay, well, I'm up for it. So why don't we do it? So here we are. Thanks to Alfredo. So, yay.
Yay us. Here we are. The band is back together.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited because this is a different topic. This isn't just a follow-up from what we did a few years ago. This is quite interesting. You know, you've obviously been on a journey and doing some different things than you were doing a few years ago. I've done my own things and doing different things. But we'll get into all of that. But this title of this webinar is called The Future of Work. And I think this is really cool because it's very topical. And since we recorded the last webinar, there's lots of things that have happened and there's lots of trends that, you know, I've been reading about and don't know enough about what's going to be happening. And you hear all sorts of stories and you hear very positive things about how work is going to change and technology is going to come in and it's going to make our lives easier and we can do more. And then you have horror stories like everyone's going to lose their jobs and robots are going to be taking over and it's going to be like the Terminator movies. So, you know, probably somewhere in the middle of that is going to be where life lands. But is that kind of a good summary of what's been happening or am I totally off base there?
No, you're absolutely on base. The world everything's always changing all the time. And the world, particularly as we think about work and what it means to us, how we find our fulfillment through it, is shifting so quickly. And this has an impact on all of us because most of us spend more than half of our waking hours working. And so to think that this kind of accelerated change is going to be something we can kind of hide our heads in the sand with is probably not the best strategy if one wants to live a life where they're thriving and excited and plugged in. And you're right. On the one hand, and depending on your point of view, it can feel like the most amazing thing in the world that's happening, or it can feel like the most terrifying thing in the world. And a lot of the work that I've done or how my work has morphed over the last couple of years is helping people really uncover the opportunity that's available to all of us inside of this space thanks to technology.
So before we get into that, and I'd love to really make this interactive, I can see we've got a bunch of people online joining us. So
hello, all the people online.
So if you've got any questions, do use the comments box, ask anything you want to ask, and we'll try and cover as much as we can in the next 50-60 minutes that we've got together. But before we do that, I realize that some people may not know who you are. I'm broadcasting this on my wall, so
how did I get here?
how did you get here? So for people who don't know who you are and why you are qualified maybe to talk on this subject. You're not just kind of going, well, I think this is going to happen. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I quit the corporate world about 5.5 years ago now, after a career that I had spent most of my time in recruiting in some way, shape, or form. Recruiting, scouting, hiring, finding people all over the world. And I ran global recruiting for Anheuser-Busch InBev, which if you drink beer or know that beer exists, you know that's company exists. And then I also ran recruiting for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. And what prompted my leaving the corporate world was interviewing tens of thousands of people who weren't particularly excited about the work that they were doing. And so initially I quit. I created a whole methodology that I've been teaching and still teach all over the world that helps people create careers that are more fulfilling. And in the midst of this, I began to notice these macro trends, really driven by technology, that are drastically changing the workspace. So I decided to put everything that I own into storage, except for what fits into a carry-on suitcase, to use my life as an experiment to look for answers to the questions of what are we going to do with all the people when technology impacts the world of work. And I was on the road. It was supposed to be about a year. I thought it was going to end up being 9 months. It ended up being about 20. And now I spend most of my time working with companies and governments, helping advise them to think strategically about what we're going to do with all the people and how to help everybody be fulfilled as technology impacts our work world.
I'm getting a sense from your expressions that you're actually quite positive about this. So you're not on the side of, okay, there's going to be mass unemployment and it's going to be a really bad thing. It sounds like you're very fired up about it, and there's some very positive things to come out of this.
Yes, I am wholly optimistic about what we can create and what's possible to create thanks to technology. And not everybody has that point of view, and I can certainly understand why. And one of the reasons I'm so motivated to help create global solutions around this is that I was born and raised in Detroit. And I saw what happened. I lived what happened when people don't think, and when I say people, I mean all of us as individuals and then larger entities like governments and companies, when we don't think preemptively about questions of the impact of technology and work. And thanks to this technology that's coming, if we think intelligently about it, we can actually use it to return work to what it was always meant to be for human beings, which isn't just a thing that you do to get a salary, but rather an act of creation and fulfillment.
So let's kind of jump in. And by the way, people, if you've got questions around anything that either I or Elatia are saying, please do leave us comments. Elatia is joining me via Skype, so I'm kind of doing all the back end, but I can relay any questions to Elatia. So don't wait to be formally asked. You can do that at any point. But I'll kind of jump in, to start off with. So, on a macro level, what are the trends? What is the future going to look like? Because from my point of view, what I hear is things like, driverless cars are going to come in, and all lorry drivers and taxi drivers and anyone who drives for a living is going to be made redundant. I'm hearing that some universities are no longer training radiologists because AI is already doing a better job than people around identifying and looking at X-rays. And so they're like you say, these whole massive changes, but I think you're much closer to it than I. So let's start with, what do we think is going to happen?
Yeah. So there was a fabulous study, and one of the first big ones, if not the first study, that came out of Oxford a few years ago. And essentially what they did is they took U.S. data, but they looked at all 702 jobs in the Bureau of Labor Statistics job bank. And they ran some algorithms to figure out which industries, which sectors, which types of jobs were going to be more likely to be, or most likely to be, computerized or taken over by robots, which is where we get this number of 47 or 50% that we now hear in all of the big studies that are out there. And essentially, the way that the scale works is that if it is a task that is reasonably repeatable in some way, shape, or form, then you can pretty much bet that it is going to be computerized or taken over by robots. And the first and the big ones that will come sooner rather than later are things like logistics, transportation, service, sales. And we already interact with some of these kinds of technologies. This isn't new. You may not think of the annoying answering service on the other side of the phone when you try to get customer service somewhere as a robot, but essentially that is. So we're familiar with some of these things already. So the more repeatable the task, the more likely it is to be taken over or computerized. That said, and one of the things that I find interesting about this is that machines and computers through machine learning are getting so smart that we would think, oh gosh, you mentioned the example of doctors or medicine. Oh, a machine could never do that better than a human. Well, actually, kind of that's the case. And so since this is here, as with so much of what we do in the world of coaching and everything else, it's like, it sounds scary, but it's happening. It's here. The most effective question isn't, oh my gosh, what are we going to do to make it stop? It's, given all of this, what do we want to create? And that's where the empowerment comes in inside of all of this, regardless of what's happening.
Is there another piece, apart from it being repeatable, is there also something about empathy as well? Because I think something that I've been reading is the jobs that require kind of that human element of empathy, bedside manner. So actually one thing I read is doctors are easier to replace than nurses.
Yes.
Because there's more empathy required in that profession.
Exactly.
Is that something else that you see?
Exactly. So things that require more empathy, things that require creative thinking and sort of amalgamation of complex data. Those are meaning complex concepts and how to use those complex concepts. Those things will continue to grow. And by the way, all of this is not doom and gloom. So there are a lot of jobs that will be going away, but there are several $1 trillion of productivity, which in economics terms translates to jobs that simply don't exist yet. Thanks to all of this new technology, thanks to new learning around brain and brain science and what it's possible for humans to do. So it's not like at the end of the day it's sort of a zero-sum game and everybody ends up losing. In fact, there are so many more new, exciting, creative vocations that are being created. It's just that they might look different than what we're used to doing today.
Could you
different.
Could you give us an example of that, like something that might be created in the future?
Yeah, so there, one of the books, and I didn't know it at the time. It's funny how these things kind of work out. But when I shortly after I quit the corporate world, I read a book called Average is Over by an economist called Tyler Cohen. And essentially, when we look at the normal bell curve of distribution of resources, of money, of ideas, that's what he's saying in terms of jobs, that average is over. Everything is going to be kind of right skewed to to a couple of kinds of work. The first one being the people who create the technology. So if I'm smart enough to have that technological brain and I'm out creating the apps or creating virtual reality or whatever that is, there are the folks, the humans who can understand how to combine human intellect with machine capability and create whole new worlds of work on top of that. And then the third piece is marketing. And it's marketing in terms of how we sell the products that are being created in terms of technology and how we create services, coaching, wellness, these kinds of things that help the people who are working in these other broader categories perform at higher and higher levels.
So we've got a question. The first question, Gisela is asked, does it mean that soft skills will be appreciated more in the future, given what we said?
Yes. And more and more and more as time goes on, soft skills and all of these things around empathy and understanding, how we relate to each other as human beings, the quality of being human. And Jack Ma, the former president of Alibaba, talks about this all the time. You know, that we will not be able to compete with robots in the things that robots do. And so we get the gift of returning to what was always amazing about us anyway, which is our empathy, our connection, our collaboration. One of the three things that I discovered as I was out on the road, how do we empower ourselves to thrive inside of this space? It's our mindset. That's the first piece. It's education. It's what we learn. And the third component is collaboration. And that's at both an individual and at an institutional level. And so things like empathy and how we collaborate and how we work well together to create together are critically important.
So let's say I'm kind of watching this either live or I'm going to watch it on a replay, and I'm like, oh God, my job could be at risk here, right?
Yes.
And you know, there's these ideas of, okay, well, you know, we're coaches, we're going to be positive, optimistic, but
Sure.
for someone who's watching this, what practical stuff could they do?
Sure.
You know, now thinking, okay, to prepare myself not to get to the stage where I've been made redundant, right?
Yeah.
And now what do I do? But to prepare for this change that is coming, like you say, it's no point burying your head in the sand, but it's coming.
Yeah.
So given that, what can people do to prepare?
Yeah, the first and critical component around all of this is mindset. And although that it sounds like I'm returning it to a coaching kind of an answer, if the past of work was salaried for most people, and the future of work is going to be entrepreneurial in some fashion, whether you're a freelancer or you are creating a scalable company or you're working for a larger organization that now demands that you have these kinds of entrepreneurial skills. And so learning resilience and putting yourself in situations where you strengthen the muscle of thriving inside of the unknown is going to be fundamentally critical. The second piece, when I talk about education, it's understanding what industries are in ascension and what industries are in decline. Now, there are great summaries of the Oxford study that I mentioned, as well as, thank God we live in the age of the internet, so all this information is available to all of us. You can see, if I'm driving trucks right now, maybe there are some skills that are related to truck driving that I may want to start to aggregate. Truck driving isn't going to go away from today till tomorrow, but if we can see that that's coming on the horizon, instead of waiting for it to happen and wondering what we do then, looking at what jobs may be analogous to what I'm doing now that could be a relatively easy jump for me could be a wonderful way to go about it. So understanding what's happening out in the marketplace. And then the third piece is asking yourself and this is where I come back to this whole idea of career creation and fulfillment. What do I want to create? Moving away from a thinking of job as it's just a salary. I'm just going to kind of go more. Globally, 87% of people are disengaged or highly disengaged at work. That means if you're standing on a train or a subway or whatever, or the metro, and you look around, it's like 8 out of the 10 people standing around you are not engaged in the work that they're doing. And so why not use this opportunity to take a few steps back and say, how do I want to use my life and what kind of impact do I want to have? And then go about designing a life that allows you to fulfill that.
So we've got a couple of questions around universal basic income. So that was great, and I think we're going to touch back on what you just said, but I want to ask this as well. It was something I was thinking about. So Joss has said, wouldn't I think the grammar's incorrect, but basically, wouldn't something like universal basic income, aka social investment, be a prerequisite for a successful transition? Because many jobs will be lost, but productivity will keep increasing, so it can be paid for. This would also allow for more of us to do what we really want? Question mark.
Yeah. So I think, and I have colleagues in the world who agree with me, and I have colleagues in the world who totally disagree with me. That's what's so beautiful about this, because no one has the right answer, right? We have hypotheses and directions that we think things are going in. I think that the whole social contract around work and what that means needs to be rewritten. And the way that I describe it when I speak with people or I'm at conferences is moving from a world where we look at or the government is going to give us universal basic income and help us move through this, or I'm going to be working for a corporation and I'm going to get a salary so I handle it myself. Or I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm corporate, or it's industrial, or it's technological. We move into a space where it's and. Large companies who have more than 200,000 people under their umbrella can no longer, in a global situation where the collaboration and our interconnectedness is more and more evident, can't simply lay off tens of thousands of workers without giving it a second thought anymore. And so collaborative solutions to things like universal basic income combined with retraining programs that companies sponsor. There's a lot of talk about this at Davos this year. So I think a combination of solutions will be there. I am a big fan of seeing what happens with experiments around universal basic income. And as we see in countries that have invested in shorter and shorter work weeks, but still having really productive economies, you see that it begs the question, why are we working ourselves 80, 90, 100 hours a week, or even 40 if we can be as productive with less work?
Yeah, that's really great. And as an optimist myself, part of me, because we don't know how things are going to be, and in moments where I'm feeling particularly optimistic, part of me thinks, if we look at healthcare, for example, and we talked about doctors, AI doing a better job than radiologists specifically in the medical world. But actually, when I look at, say, the National Health Service that we have in the UK right now, they're massively overstretched. It's not like we're at peak efficiency right now,
right.
and now someone's going to come in and now we're going to have all this excess labor. I think that there's opportunity to improve things and do things differently. And I also see globally, like you say, these questions are being asked on a global level. And if we look back, I think 10, 15 years ago, the questions investors were asking companies is very different to now. Like you say, it's not okay now for global companies just to lay off, tens of thousands of people. There's kind of backlash against that sort of stuff, and people want companies to have that social conscience. So I think there's a lot of things that are changing, and I love the fact that you said that you don't have the answers. We don't know. We're all hypothesizing. But what I loved that you said at the start of this webinar was, it's not enough to bury your head in the sand, right? Like some things are going to happen. It's on the horizon. What exactly it looks like, we don't know, but it is coming, and it is on the way. And personally, I feel, and again, maybe this is with my coach hat on, I wouldn't be relying on, well, there's going to be a universal basic income coming in. Somebody else is going to look after me. And I think the purpose of this webinar is a bit more like, let's get educated. Again, it's like hope for the best, prepare for the worst kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a distinction. When I talk about the mindset piece, when I'm either teaching this in the classroom or on the stage somewhere, the way that I describe it is captain versus captive. And, folks like Steve Chandler, who both of us have been coached by, uses owner victim. Others, Joel Osteen uses victim victors. But it's that distinction whose underlying roots are, am I going to be captive to the circumstances around me and allow those to simply buffet me around and hope for the best? Or am I going to get into the captain's chair and say, okay, what's inside of my control? I can't change the fact that that's changing. I can learn a new skill. I can learn how to do things that might be uncomfortable right now, but that are going to ensure my long-term financial stability and health and freedom. Really, like, let's move beyond what's just survival mode and talk about how we can use this stuff to really thrive.
I turned around because I realised the book I want is not behind me. I've left it in the other room, very, very well prepared, of course. I read a book last year called The Excellence Dividend by Tom Peters.
I haven't read it.
And so Tom Peters wrote a book, or co-wrote a book in the 80s called In Search of Excellence. And it was kind of voted best business book of all time recently. And this is his sequel, and he's written a load of other books, but it was kind of like the subtitle is something about dealing with the upcoming, revolution in technology or something. And there's a lot, it's a big thick book. It's a brilliant book. I highly encourage people to buy it and read it. But one of the things that he talked about, and I'm really curious about your point of view on this, is he's saying that companies that he feels that are going to withstand, companies and people that are going to be able to deal with this upcoming huge changes in technology, are people and companies who focus on excellence, not on just being okay, but the ones that are really going to focus on being amazing. And he pulls out a load of examples in this book. And one of the things that really surprised me was, if we look at an industry that has already been changed by technology, and that I'd say is consumer electronics. I remember you go back 20, 30 years ago, and if you were going to buy something, you went into a store, you spoke to someone, and you bought it. Whereas now, I don't know, especially in the UK is really quite advanced in terms of online shopping. Yeah. People buy stuff online, and so a lot of retailers have really struggled with that, and they've cut costs and cut costs and cut costs. Mm-hmm. And in the US, he was giving an example. I forget the name of the company, but he gave an example of a retail store where they did the opposite that most retailers do. So they've overinvested in their staff. They have more staff than they need. They have higher quality of staff than they need. So you go in and the people know everything about the products. They've turned it into a destination. There's like a full size car with all the kit on it, a full scale boat, massive waterfall as soon as you walk in, and it's a full on, it's, I can't remember, 30,000 square feet. I mean, it's like, or something, it's I don't know if I got that right, but basically it's a huge store with really cool stuff and really smart people in there, and this company is booming, and it's doing really, really well in an industry where generally the industry is struggling.
Yeah, and that's it. It's, as I observe it, it's an understanding that business as such has to adapt with the wave of technology that comes through, with our online, with our purchasing experience. If you think about how we use a smartphone, if you own a smartphone, and how quickly we have access to information and how quickly we can be connected, and then we walk into a store. I had the exact opposite retail experience that you're talking about. I walked into, here in the US, we have these big shopping malls, and where there are several department stores and other stores, and I hadn't been in one in years, and you couldn't find anybody to help you out if you wanted to. And the one person I found was actually at a customer service desk. And so she was serving several people with big problems at the same time that I was trying to buy a simple item. And you see the stark contrast between what we expect, thanks to this technological world that we're living in, and what was happening inside of that store. And so this idea that excellence is required moving forward, I couldn't agree with it more, because companies are no longer competing inside of a market. It's not competing with consumer goods. It's competing with the changes out in the world and how quickly we're adapting to them or not.
Yeah, and I'm assuming you work with your clients on this as well. But one thing I've been working with my clients on now is those who are in corporate jobs, is that, hey, this is coming, and if jobs are going to go, I mean, they're not going to fire everyone in a company overnight, but they'll start to get rid of the poorer performers. And so if you're one of those people that are investing in yourself, and that can be done in a myriad of ways, but if you're doing that and you're really aiming towards excellence and not good enough, like I used to many years ago in my old corporate job, because I wasn't engaged. But if you're really aiming towards excellence, it helps you stand out. And if you're, I don't know, I'm putting words in your mouth, but you let me know what you think. If you're saying that such a high percentage of people are disengaged, then would you say, well, get into a role where you are engaged, so you can put the passion into the role where you become truly excellent, because that's going to help you, in the future with all this change that's coming.
Yes, exactly. Functionally, it's going to help you. I want to continue to thrive inside of this system and the structure that's already there. And as far as just being in a role that we're engaged with, because I also, in the spirit of stuff that I don't want people to know about me, I was also not particularly engaged in the work that I was doing by the time I was leaving. And so some of the questions that I had to ask my own self, so everything that I talk about and that I teach and everything I've done mad scientist on myself. I've tried it all out just to see if it works. And some of the questions that I had to ask myself were really like, what do you want to get out of this life? And what do you want to contribute while you're here? Because you could kick the can down the road for the next 35 or 40 years. Things were going on paper. Things were great. But do I really want to keep championing mediocrity in this way and just sort of kind of showing up and checking a box? Or Or do I want to figure out what's available to me and start to live a life where my soul is unleashed and I feel freedom and I get to be around amazing people and do fun things? Like, that sounds like a lot more fun to me than the first option.
And I think one of the things that technology is allowing us to do right now is exactly that. You know, and there's been lots of books written on this that, you know, I'm publishing my book soon.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've been really focused on it this month, and what I'm reminded of is actually I've done that kind of all myself. In terms of, if you go back, you know, not so long ago, I would have needed to find a publisher. I would have, you know, needed to get a book deal, and it was a very, you know, very rigid system that I had to go through. And the route that I'm going to market with my book deal, which is with my, not book deal, with my book, is I'm doing it myself. I'm putting it up on Amazon. I've hired in help, which normally a publisher would give, but I've done it myself. That route wasn't possible, you know, relatively recently. And the same is true for so many things. You know, the jobs that are, God, people have jobs. I still don't fully understand being a Instagram social media influencer, but people have these jobs that just simply didn't exist. And, you know, who would have thought, God, you know, 10 years ago, you could get paid and make a very good living for spending time on your phone. Yeah. And pretty much is what people are doing. So, you know, anything you can think of, anything you can think of, it's available, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons that makes this so exciting to me. There are a lot of companies working on things like ubiquitous internet, Virgin, Google, and several. So imagine a world not supposed to be in the next 5 to 7 years, where we have ubiquitous internet and 3 billion people who have never had access to the internet and its educational and entrepreneurial opportunities all of a sudden now have access to a free global market. And you better believe that this person who's been subsisting on $2 a day in the middle of God knows where, who never had access to these things before, is going to be hungry, maybe literally hungry, and looking for access to that market. And you might say, oh, but what if they're not literate, or what if they don't have access to a phone? Well, actually, in many developing markets, the smartphone is given for free. What's charged for is the charging station, is the electricity. So the models are flipped in other parts of the world. And thanks to things like machine learning, there's instantaneous translation. And so platforms create avenues for people to come online. So it's not such a strange or far away scenario. And motivated humans, guess what? We create amazing things. So that's one way that I see the positive impact and the positive possibility around this kind of technology.
Excellent. If you've got any questions, people, do ask. Gisela has said she sees this in her work in educating nurses and teaching assistants. The developments offer people more options for working in a different fashion with their target groups, but it still requires quite a shift in how people look at work and their profession in general. Yeah,
and it's mindset. It really is a mindset shift, which is when people ask me, what should I do? What should I learn? The short answer is, on the one hand, like, it kind of doesn't matter, because things are going to be changing so much. This morning I was reading some articles that say learning any coding language at all today is going to be like learning ancient Greek was, 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It's like, it's interesting, but, and it gives you access to a body of knowledge from a certain time in history, but, how useful is it actually for you in your day to day if you're operating out in the world and outside of academia? And so that's why I stress so much and inviting people, and how can we do this, right? I talk about flexing that muscle of resilience. It really is as simple as trying something that you've never done before. Learning a skill, and whether it's technologically related or not, learning how to play the piano, taking an improv comedy class, but getting your brain and nervous system used to doing things that you don't know how to do, because through the way that work has been structured, we've been lulled into believing that life is constant. and that we can depend on things and that things are a certain way. Except zero places in nature, zero places is anything constant. And so I think this is a remembering for us as humans of coming back to learning to thrive in a world where everything is constantly changing. And so to the point of educating people, it really is a lot around mindset.
And do you do a lot of that kind of work with your own clients and people that might not know you? I mean, you do this with kind of very senior individuals. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I work with CEOs and senior leaderships of large companies, with government officials and politicians around the world. And now, since I started doing this future of work stuff, I now speak on global kinds of stages. And so I get the opportunity to interact with, and it's me sharing the knowledge that I've learned. And the great gift of doing this is learning the perspectives of people who are both creating the change and then responsible for others inside of that space of change. And what is really heartening for me, because there are so many challenges around this, is that there are people, fabulous, creative, wonderful, and influential people all over the world who really want to turn this into the positive outcome that we talked about at the beginning, and not sort of that Terminator style, everything blows up, look out because here comes Armageddon kind of scenario.
So Giles, who is or was a career coach,
Giles,
he said it's going to take a lot of coaches to get this new reality out there to the masses. What advice would you have for coaches who might be watching this?
Yeah. So I think that the advice that I would have would be the same or similar to everybody else. So first of all, the market for really talented coaches is hotter than ever, because there are few people in the world, even people who are plugged in to broader conversations, who really understand what the impact of this is. And so this is a great strategic opportunity to support people in making this kind of transition. And so, hooray, there's lots of opportunity. And second, get yourselves educated. See what's happening in the marketplace. Learn about what's happening in terms of macro trends. If there's a subsegment of a market that you're particularly knowledgeable about, see what kind of impact this may have and how you might be able to contribute. I think the underlying question for all of this is always, okay, how can I learn? What do I need to learn? And how can I add value? How can I contribute? How can I serve?
Excellent. Don, who is got a question. Hi, Kush and Elatia. Is our future of work driven at least partially by what seems to be a much smaller focus on personal ownership and responsibility in our education system? 1, is that true or an incorrect assumption? And 2, will that help a person better stand out following the path that you describe?
So in terms of, I think what we're saying here is that we've been lulled into less personal ownership and responsibility thanks to the way that corporate structure has been, or more traditional structure. I think this is what we're saying.
I think it's based on our educational system.
Okay, based on yes. So, well, and in either way, because again, that distinction of or it's corporate or it's education, that distinction of a moment when I end university or whatever people stop learning, and I go into corporate and then never shall I learn anything again, that's going away. And so the lines are blurring between what is sort of corporate and what is our educational life. Whatever we are being taught and however systems are structured that remove our personal responsibility, it's just broken. It was broken anyway for creating a life of fulfillment, as I understand it. However, now we cannot rely on other people to solve our world and create our happiness for us. We can't. The ingrained system, it's like turning the Titanic. Like you can try, but it's going to take a longer time for those systems to catch up. So why not seize this opportunity and get into that captain's chair and create powerful solutions for for ourselves.
Yeah, from my point of view, in the second piece of the question, will that help a person better stand out full in the paths you describe? In my opinion, and I'm biased, but absolutely yes. I think someone who does take ownership, we talked about this distinction, owner, victim, or captain, captive. Someone who does take ownership of their own career, their own work life, and I'm guessing if you are watching this, that includes you, because you're taking the time out on an evening to listen to us talk about work rather than watching TV or whatever else. If that is you, that I think absolutely it's going to stand you in a very good stead. It's going to make you stand out, because I think, and I may be wrong, I still think most people are really unaware of the change that is going to come in the world of work. And I was kind of unaware really about that up until about a year ago, when I started looking into it a little bit and started reading about it a little bit, far less than you, Elatia, but change is coming. Yeah. And I think some people have assumed change is going to be really quick, that, they thought, right, we're all going to stop buying cars and driverless cars are going to come here. And just because it hasn't happened overnight doesn't mean it's not happening. Doesn't mean change isn't going to come. And look, if it takes a little bit longer than people are predicting, that's great. It gives you a little bit longer to prepare. But I'd say absolutely, because, let's say you're a company and you're going to slash 20% of your workforce. Generally, people are going to slash the 20% that they're easiest to let go of. And the ones that are the most invested in kind of being really good at their job, really enjoy the work they do, they're going to be adding the most value to the company, I think are the ones that companies are going to be least likely to lay off. And in terms of globally as companies, the companies that will survive, drastic change are going to be the ones that are going to be I think it's not rocket science, the ones that are really, really good at what they do and are going to be going over and above.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And there's preparing ourselves for what's coming. And the analogy that I use quite often, or the description that I use quite often, is it's a moment in a tsunami. We are in the moment in a tsunami, when all of the humans who are standing on the beach are sort of looking around, and you start to notice it's really quiet, and the birds have gone away, and other weird stuff is happening, and we ask ourselves, is something going on here? But by this time, that water's already coming. It's already in effect. And so we're at that moment where we can either sort of be caught by surprise, or we just get on a really big surfboard and ride this thing into the opportunity that is available to all of us. I mean, imagine, and by the way, this is available to us now all the time thanks to the internet. Imagine having multiple streams of income that allow you to work, if at all, whatever you want to call work, but allow you to do things 2 months a year, 1 day a week. And these are concepts that people like Tim Ferriss have been talking about for a long time. But as I see it, it's freedom. It's freedom to live and to create and to contribute in ways that are meaningful.
Thank you. If you've got any more questions, Don, let us know if that answered your question. Let us know if you think Elatia and I are too optimistic and positive and biased. Please let us know if you disagree or if this is making sense. We've got another 10-15 minutes or so before we finish. Is there anything, Elatia, that we haven't talked about yet that you think is really important with regards to this topic?
Yeah, I had to learn early on, or if I learned early on in discovering this topic, that if I wanted to be effective in communicating with other people about what was possible, I had to play a game called I Say, They Hear. So when you and I talk a lot about technology and impact and computers and all this stuff, what so many of us hear is threat, instability, insecurity, invalidation. And while the tendency may be to feel that, and one of the things that I learned also on this trip was the absolute terror that it can feel when the things that I'm used to are going away or that those structures aren't there. I mean, I really learned that on a visceral level by using my life as an experiment to discover these answers around the future of work. So I understand how scary it can be. And we can't change what's happening out here in the outside world. And so by seeing, instead of hearing, oh no, things are changing, threats, looking at this as things are changing, where's the opportunity for me? Where is it? And then turning ourselves into adventurers or detectives. Where's the opportunity? Where is there a place where I can add value? So that's probably the one thing that I would say that we haven't touched on, because mindset's the biggest piece of, how do we empower ourselves and prepare ourselves. If we want more tactical kinds of things, it's education, and it's education in understanding what industries are in ascension and in decline, understanding how our current skill set fits within that so that we can learn more or adapt in some way, shape, or form. And the next piece around education is, if we're going to learn something, learn how to be an entrepreneur effectively, because the future of work is wholly entrepreneurial. Whether you're starting a scalable company, whether you are working for an organization that now requires that of you, or like so many more of us in the world, you're going to be freelancer, and you'll need to understand how to market yourself, what cash flow is, and those sorts of things. So get your mind in a good place and get ready for the adventure.
I'm reminded of kind of Cal Newport, who talks a lot about, deep work and career capital. And I think that's what you kind of pointed to, gain some skills in areas that are really going to help you in the long term, is what I'm hearing. And Cal Newport's books are really good, by the way. Yeah, again, recommend them. Don said, I think you guys nailed it. I appreciate your take on my question. I'm in the owner boat, as you accurately perceived. Thanks for sharing your time today. Giles says, it feels like the people in employment who see themselves as entrenched through long service are also the people who understand their industry the best. Taking all the malcontent about the way their job works, for instance, and finding the human aspect of that, the bit that can't be automated, it's an opportunity, isn't it? They're the best place to see that.
Yeah, so my take, and Ankush, I think this goes back to your point about excellence that has been interwoven throughout our conversation. And because things are going to be shifting so much, although people may have long-term experience, if I were hiring, and in fact, I still do some supporting and recruiting through some of the work that I do. If I were hiring someone, the person who's been there for a long time and isn't happy or engaged versus someone who's hungry to learn and wants to contribute and can also walk in the door with some of that empathy, that's the person who I'm going to be a lot more interested in working with. And so this isn't devaluing somebody's skills or experience. However, simply having knowledge, I don't think is going to be enough anymore. Especially thanks to things like the internet and machine learning, knowledge was going to be more and more ubiquitous, and critically analyzed knowledge is going to be more and more ubiquitous. And so I think there's a lot of engagement that comes into this question.
And I think a lot of what we're talking about isn't new, I think, but there's just a greater need for it. So,
yes.
I remember reading, 15 years ago, and I've never forgotten this, that one of the number one thing, and maybe it's not the number one, maybe it is, but it's a top thing. The number one thing I read that employers look for in a new recruit is enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I'm hearing you say, again right now.
Well, that's it, because I do a lot of work around recruiting as well and supporting companies for this. But in hiring people, if you hire the wrong person, there's a great quote, I'm just going to paraphrase it here in this book by this guy called Dan Hardy, which is essentially like, if you hire the wrong person, you basically have just invited cancer into your organization, lit a huge pile of money on fire, and put poison in the well. I mean, it's essentially disastrous if you bring the wrong person in. And for your culture, for your productivity and profitability. And so, gosh, if I want a negative Nelly sitting around and saying how everything isn't going to work, or do I want somebody who's going to come in and not only be excited about the things that are possible, but also willing to roll up their sleeve and actually execute on that work? Man, that's a really winning recipe.
Interesting. Joel says, I suppose as a coach, I'm thinking about helping those people in that position to see the flip side of it, i.e. how important it is to get engaged. I don't know about you, Elatia, but from my point of view as a coach, I think the number one thing is working with people who really want coaching. And so you're right, there's a huge opportunity to help people who are disengaged in organizations, but I think that only really works when they really want to change. You know, because you're right, there are so many people in every organization that could really, you know, take on this, and again, we're biased, but take on this mindset of excellence and change and opportunity, but not everyone will, and I think that's totally okay.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And you hit the nail on the head. The folks who are coachable are the ones who are going to get it. When the framework that I created around career transition and transformation is a 3-part framework. And it's commit, create, and contribute. And the commitment piece, so many people come in and say, oh, I want a better job, or I want to start a new company, or whatever it is that people want to do. Or as a call I had, this is now a couple of years ago, some guy called me from one of the big consulting firms wanting to start his own company. And through our conversation, I discovered that he had had his plan on paper for 6 years and had done 0 with it. And so we can talk a lot about the what that we want to do, but until that commitment is in place, that desire, as a coach, you're not going to be effective, not because of you aren't skilled, but because the person isn't ready. And that person is going to have a perception that they aren't being coached when it's really an internal commitment kind of a thing.
Which leads nicely on to Alfredo asking, do you have a suggestion for coaches to become more aware of this technological trend, or tsunami as you called it? Do you see any blind spots in how coaches are contributing now in relation to this?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing that I would recommend for coaches is to plug into the world. Now, a lot of people who I know who do move into the coaching career on purpose, they stop watching news, reading the newspaper, and keeping up on current events. And while I think that there are ways, and I certainly choose strategies to consume this information in a way that I get to decide what filter it has, completely ignoring it is also not going to work very well if you want to support people with these kinds of challenges. So I would say plug in, get yourself educated. MIT is a wonderful source for this kind of thinking. The World Economic Forum provides fabulous information and data just to have the raw data there for yourselves, and then you can decide how you want to use it. So that's the first thing. And then blind spots, as far as coaching is concerned, I think a second piece there, which is related to the first one, is a general understanding of business and business impact and strategy, and being able to see how, particularly if you're coaching leadership inside of companies, or if you're coaching individuals who are looking to make a switch of some kind, under being able to correlate these mindset components to what's happening strategically out in the market. I think a lot of folks who also get into coaching, no matter how well they've been trained in business knowledge, and by the way, I was guilty of this too when I first quit. I was like, I don't want to deal with any more of this business knowledge stuff. But that's an easy opportunity to combine two things and help you serve your clients a lot better.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. And Alfredo, I've mentioned it before, I'm going to mention it again. If you want one takeaway from me, because I'm kind of much less knowledgeable, I guess, on this subject than Elatia, but in terms of what's been really helpful for me is The Excellence Dividend by Tom Peters. It's only came out a year ago. It's still very relative and new and modern, and it's also got a ton of further reading checklists in there that can help you learn more about this sort of stuff. So that's my personal recommendation. If there was one book you wanted to take away from this, what to research, do check out that book. It's one that I highly recommend.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing about today's day and age. You hit on it earlier also with access to technology and how this brings opportunity to us. We don't have to have access to a library. We don't have to be in Harvard or on a campus or on Oxford's campus or in great centers of academic knowledge. We have Google. We can go online and learn anything. And we can go online and learn anything and connect with the experts in the world who are thinking about these things. And by the way, this is a thing that I do all the time. I hear a podcast that I think is interesting. I write to the guy who did the research. I have a call coming up later this week that has to do with virtual reality and the future of career with one of the guys who's doing cutting edge neuroscience research, because I heard what he said and reached out to him. Like, we have access. So it's all sitting here in our hands, either at our computer or inside our little phone box that we carry around.
It's amazing how open people are if you just reach out to them.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful. And I can say I've made so many friends and so many business contacts and learned so many things just by sending an email. And as colleagues of ours would say, if you send them something and they don't respond to you, then your response is, okay, who's next?
Wonderful. Joel said, thank you both. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. That's a really great observation and one that I, as a new coach, need to take on board.
Amazing.
Thanks, Charles. I'm glad that was helpful to you. So we've got a few minutes left. If there's any other questions, you've got literally a few seconds to get them in. Otherwise, we're done. So Elatia, on the note of reaching out to people, if someone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way that they can do that if they might want to talk to you further about this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the best and fastest way to get a hold of me is either through direct message on Facebook or direct message on LinkedIn. And thanks to LinkedIn's filters, I see newer contacts a lot faster, so that's probably the best way to do it. You can just LinkedIn stalk me. I'm the only Elatia Abate out there, and feel free to connect with me and ask me any questions that you might have.
Fantastic. Well, I've got my banner underneath over here, so you can find me on Facebook. You're probably watching this on Facebook. If not, and I upload this to YouTube, you can just contact me on my website. Lynn is saying, this has been really valuable. Thank you. I learned a lot. I'm glad this has been helpful. And if you've got any questions for Elatia or myself, do feel free to reach out and ask us. And we'll do our best to get back to you.
Yeah. Well, Kush, I can't thank you enough for giving me the opportunity to reunite the band and spend another hour and change with you. It's been a real pleasure. It's always so fun.
Thank you, Elatia. And this is part of my personal development, professional development of learning more for myself. So thank you for spending the time with all of us. It's been really great, really, really helpful. You've already got one person. Richard said he will get in contact. So there you go.
Hooray!
And I think I've tagged Elatia. If I haven't, I'll tag her in the top so people can find the correct Elatia Abate on Facebook.
Beautiful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.